All right. We are live, Mr. Vice Chair. And so we have Vice Chair Roy Rogers in the room with Commissioner Willie, and online we have Chair Harrington, Commissioner Fye, and Commissioner Treese. So over to you, Vice Chair Rogers.
Thank you. Hello to all of my colleagues online. And for those of you who don't know, the chair, she's on the East Coast. It's what, a little after 5 there. So we probably by the end of the night we'll be tired if she stays with us the entire time. And Commissioner Treese has got a bit of the bug and was very considerate to the rest of us and said, I don't think I want to infect you, and we appreciate that. And then and then Commissioner Fye has at least one, if not two, children who are ill, and so it's very difficult for her to make it in today. But they're all here personally, so it's going to be a late meeting, and we're expecting that. So why don't we jump into communications, and so that we have someone who's 3,000 miles away and probably going to fall asleep on us. Why don't we go to the chair first?
Happy to, and hello from sunny New Hampshire. So last week, I prepared to depart on Friday. So really the only notable meetings, I met with Tigard Mayor Lube, as I'm doing with all 3 of the new 2023 mayors. And then yesterday by Zoom, I had my monthly chair and mayor's meeting where we synced up on the camping ordinance, time, place, and manner work in the different cities. And I'll write up a short summary email. But they're looking forward to, or they're continuing to follow our ordinance work that will be coming back to us in April. Will be apparent, as I understand it, seeing a draft version of an ordinance for us, the board, to go over. Their interest is to ensure that we have some commonality across the jurisdiction so that it isn't a disjoint quilt of different strategies in different places. So some of the jurisdictions already have time, place, and manner set up in their cities. Others don't. So we're all figuring it out together. So I'll send a summary email out on that as well. And then we'll get into that again in early April. So that's it from me. I'll be, after one more meeting tomorrow, I'll be completely offline until I return on April 2nd, unless of course I get some phone calls that bring something to my attention. But I don't have anything else for today until we get to leadership communication with Ms. Angie. Thank you.
Thank you, and safe trip home. When are you coming home? About a week?
10 days.
10 days?
Yeah, Sunday, April 2nd. It was fortuitous for me that I'd already planned on taking that school vacation week off. So I'm just in a different venue and dealing with different matters. So, yeah.
Best to you and your mom. Why don't we jump over to Commissioner Treese, since she was the first to say that she was not feeling well.
Well, thank you, and I'm sorry not to be there with you. This last week, I had a meeting with Commissioner Willie with Tess Fields regarding home share of Oregon, and there's a bill that group would like the county to support that's in the legislature right now. It's HB 3032. The concept of home share is to open your home to somebody who has the need of a room or a family in to share your home with. And the concept behind the bill is that it would provide you a tax break on the money that they pay you for that room. They're also requesting the county to chip in $250,000, similar to what Multnomah County did. And both Commissioner Willie and I made it clear to Tess Fields, who was presenting this, that our budget is very tight and it's unlikely that we'll be able to do something along that order. We've got a question right now into Comey about his thoughts on the program, and we'll be following up if there's any further information. I attended the ERMDAC meeting.
Quick interrupt on that.
Oh, yeah, please.
When we have our next government relations sync up relative to this session, if we could chat about that bill, that would be great. Because related, and as soon as you brought up state legislature, it reminded me that I need to find a note for myself. Aaron may have listed it in the government relations memo to us. There is a bill that Tootie Smith had asked one of their legislators in the Clackamas County area to advance, to allow in rural areas, that rural residential areas that are not in urban reserves, to allow one RV in addition to the home to be used for housing, with other qualifiers of the infrastructure on site needs to be available for water and sewer. Right, I looked the bill up in OLIS, and it's right now using the directive word of counties shall allow versus may. And the bill passed, it's a Senate bill, and I think it's something like 1,030 or 1,033, something like that. And so it passed out of the Senate committee with that shall language. So it'll be a word change on the House side. So I will follow up with an email. I think there's no reason for us to be against it. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned. Thank you for having that tickler for me, Commissioner Treese.
Thank you. And thanks, Kevin, for stopping the clock. Let's see, I met with ERMDAC. We had a report out on the pedestrian and biking improvement projects and the 2023 ERMD pedestrian and biking improvements, the staff recommendations for the 150% list. I also had a meeting with HPAC, Homeless Plan Advisory Committee, and the agenda included a presentation on the One Homeless Governance Structure. And that's the project with the goal to bring all advisory bodies in order together to inform one homeless services system. We looked at the 2023 budget engagement update, and there was an HPAC membership update, and there was the homeless services staff report. And on Friday, I attended the RDPO meeting, and that agenda included welcoming the new RDPO managing director. His name is Mark Ferdig. And we also received a legislative and policy update. I always appreciate the fact that John Wheeler's on those calls too. So we are, communicating if there's anything that I need to be emphasizing there. So thank you to John. This week, we had the impact strategy session, and that may not be a strategy session, but what I'm doing is before impact meetings, meeting with all of the representatives that are on impact that are on the west side. And the purpose there is just to look at the agenda, look at this month's agenda, future agenda, see if there's something that they'd like to put on the agenda, and also to discuss anything that might be on their minds in relationship to the various updates. So yesterday it included Mayor Tim Rosner, Mayor Steve Calloway, and Gordon Hubbies from the Special Districts Group. We were missing Luis Nava, but we're looking to get him involved as well. So with that, let's see, this week I have a coffee with Mayor Beatty and Commissioner Fye tomorrow, and a meeting with Randy Ely from PGE. And then I will also be on spring break vacation, going to a volleyball tournament in Spokane, Washington. A very glamorous sun-baked vacation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fye?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm so used to saying good morning for our meetings. I'm glad we have this virtual ability to join our meetings. I also was just thinking about how perhaps for working parents who have this opportunity to join their work online, the era of calling in sick might have been done. So I was just thinking about when I would call in sick if my kid is sick. But today I'm here with you and I'm very appreciative of this opportunity. In terms of my own board or leadership update, one thing that I wanted to just bubble for actually a few things. But first one, last week we had JPAC. As I mentioned, the agenda was very light, a lot of informational stuff, and then one action item. But one of the administrative thing that I think our staff bubbled for, I think the two other board members, the information went to, each year Metro releases a report on compliance by local jurisdictions with Metro's requirement for local jurisdictions to achieve regional vision in the 2040 growth concept. And that's it's detailed in the urban growth management functional plan and the regional transportation functional plan. I'm happy to report, I think our staff had a note that we weren't in compliance, but as of JPAC meeting, it was reported that all jurisdictions are in compliance for the transportation functional plan. So, which is a good news on that part. Last week, I also had a meeting with the regional CEO of the American Red Cross, Priscilla Fuluentes, and she's looking to connect with, I think she's new to her role for a few months now, but she's been with the American Red Cross for a long time, and she's connecting and meeting with the Tri-County elected leaders, especially the counties, and she's looking to connect with the remainder of the board, and Brenda will email your staff to make that connection. She's really looking forward and was very appreciative about hearing and watching our board information, the disaster or the earthquake training we did. The other exciting thing I did last week was I attended my first CPO meeting, CPO 3 meeting. This CPO covers the area of Garden Home, Raleigh Hills, and then West Lobe, following the reapportionment. So which now means that this CPO I share with, this is the area Commissioner Treese and I share now. It was a really good meeting, very engaged group of people, and had a lot of questions about the reapportionment process and how we made that decision and where they can get information and how to engage us. So very, very productive and a very engaged group. And with that, and there's so many meetings planned. Commissioner Treese, could I ask a clarifying question to you on one of your report out? MPAC as your alternate. Am I attending that for you or?
That'd be great if you can.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yes, I forgot. I didn't hear you mention. So I was like, are we back to original plan, you attending? And
I'm dealing with half a brain, so I apologize.
no worries. Okay, well, I'll be happy to attend that. So, and I'll report back what we discussed next week.
I did also mention to the people yesterday that you are my alternate.
Good. I can tell by the voice for both of you that you're feeling a little under the weather. So thanks for hanging in there. That's terrific. Jerry, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next. I attended the GPI board meeting last week, and Certainly for those meetings, we get a real update on what opportunities that the metro area has kind of in the queue, how much contacts we're getting, things like that. They are working on, they're working with a couple of consulting firms to work on of course, the Portland image and see what we need to do to certainly make that look better, I guess, nationally. So we'll stay tuned with that. As Pam noted, I met with her for the Home Share Oregon. This is also, just to remind you, this is the time that I periodically go out and meet with all of the 6 cities in my district and their city councils. So last week was Gaston City Council. It's always fun to go out to Gaston. They're meeting in the fire station out there now because their city office, which is not nearly as nice as the fire station, but they have some mold issues or something going on there, so they can't meet there. So we met at the fire station. It's always good to sit down and have conversations with them, talked about things like forestry and what impact it's going to have on their lumber mill that's right up the road. Yeah, it's always good to reach out and talk to them. I also attended the NAOP breakfast, and the NAOP breakfast featured Multnomah County Chair Vega Peterson, Portland City Councilor Renee Gonzalez, and PBA Government Affairs John Isaacs. And the PBA has put out this document. I think I sent it out to everybody on the commission. I hope you took a look at it. It's basically kind of a state of the city, state of downtown, the central city is what they call it. It's pretty candid, but it's also pretty brutal. It's not a good snapshot. So we've got a lot of work to do. They talked about PBA is pushing back on any new taxes in Multnomah County and City of Portland. There is a capital gains tax that is on the ballot, I believe, in May. And if that passes, City of Portland and Multnomah County will have the highest tax rate in the country. They were only behind New York by less than a percentage, but now they're going to scream right on ahead if they pass that. So just another hurdle, I guess, that we're going to have to deal with. And then Chair Vega Peterson talked a little bit about the preschool for all because she was asked the question of how's that going. Remember, we are in year 3 and they are still in the formation stage. I don't know what they projected initially that it would take for them to get this started, but we should be getting close to that as they're collecting $100 million a year. And that tax rate also goes up 0.8% here in a couple of years. And the chair was asked if she would not implement that tax rate. There was no commitment. So AVSAC, met with AVSAC, of course, they're following a number of bills and Zakar is overseeing that and keeping everybody informed on those things. Public Safety Committee also met last Friday. And again, Erin gave us an update on that. So she's busy not only in Salem, but keeping everybody up to speed. And remember that we have next week, we have Lynn Schroeder, who is retiring. Her retirement party is next week, and I'll be attending that. And then Steve Berger is also retiring, and we don't have a time set for him yet. And then lastly, I got 1 minute to tell you about last night. I went to the Forest Grove City Council and was forewarned that they were going to be talking to me about the Elm Street purchase. 23 people testified up front before I got to the podium. They were all very passionate about not only Elm Street, but Camp 47, about their livelihood in the Forest Grove area that has been significantly impaired by the homeless community. And so I invited every one of them to come to our meeting tonight. So we'll see how many of them show up, but Kevin was particularly appreciative of that I was inviting 23 of my new best friends to come to the board meeting tonight. But it is, it's something that we are going to have more conversation about because I'm not convinced that's a good location, but that's just me. So with that, North Plains State of the City is also this week, I believe, and I'll be going to that. So I'm out of time.
I say thank you, but packing our chambers, I don't know that.
I like to get here to get a chair.
Yeah, that's,
Mhm.
I guess that's interesting. Couple of things, just an update on Region One, as I mentioned, we didn't have a big agenda. We're gonna talk about, I guess, transference of the Hall Street between the state and City of Tiger. That'll be part of the agenda, and it was a suggestion by our own Chris Steppenbach, is that we take a look at the Oregon Transportation Plan and just get an update. So I think Region One's a bit challenging because you have a regional group and JPAC and others who are meeting regularly, and we're simply getting a lot of information and not a lot of decisions made. But so that's that one. Next Monday, interestingly enough, you saw my agenda. I've got some WA and other meetings next Monday, kind of a dual meeting that some of you might be interested in. One, WA is hosting a update on the CHIPS Act. They're having 2 senators come in and speak about that. And then at the same exact time, the Washington County Chambers is hosting an event with Chris Strickler on tolling, update on tolling and what that all means. So I'm going to see with my IT guys if I can't double monitor it, but I'll see how that goes. I wanted to mention I had a couple of meetings I've had to cancel. For those of you, I had a bad eye several months back, and I had that little problem with a detached cornea. They fixed that, and now it's completely clouded up, so I have to go in for another surgery this Thursday evening. So I'll be out of commission for a little bit of time. So hopefully I asked if I could see like an eagle, and they'll say, we are lucky if you could see at all. So but anyway, that's not encouraging, but so I've got to take care of that at the end of this week. 2 things for you, Tanya, and it may not be sexy to anybody else, but it concerns me. One, is statutorily in the state of Oregon, we have a thing called collateral on investments. And what it used to say was that all municipalities who had their funds in banks or institutions were guaranteed that they had 110% collateralization of them. That changed, and I can't remember, years go by, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when I said banks only have to collateralize 25%. That's the way it works. I don't want to be a worrywart, but when you got, a lot of millions of dollars like the county, and I guess clean water the same way, do we need to play the game of moving investments to several banks, to protect ourselves? Or is there some sort of additional collateralization that the banks may give us, so that if all of a sudden, and this will be Jerry who has to explain it because the other 4 of us don't want to, if all of a sudden 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 million disappear, we have a good explanation for it. So I just, I'm not suggesting the bank's going to run or private problem, but I'd like to know what we're doing. The other issue, and the others may have some interest in it too, everyone from the president to the Congress to some states are really concerned about TikTok. I don't know the entire issue. I don't know whether TikTok is blocked, like some are doing from government issued equipment. I don't care what you do on your personal stuff, but a slight update on that, because it sounds like things are not as smooth as we'd all like them to be. So anyway, go ahead.
If you want to pass it to me
Go
on
up.
those questions. So
Yeah, sure.
regarding investments, we'll follow up with the board on a memo with more information on our approach. I know that both Greg and Ethel have been actively looking at our investment strategy and approach. So this is a timely question. Regarding TikTok, you had brought this up in the past, and staff are actively working on that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so we'll just say 10 as a round number about on staff devices. We have worked through individual staff who have required that they remove TikTok from their devices. if it's not being used for a work purpose. So your question had resulted in IT putting one further kind of security measure in place, but there's only a couple handful of employees. But I can follow up once again with IT because they were trying to finalize the project process before we reported back.
Thank you. Again, I don't know enough about it to know what alarm I should have. I just saying it sounds like a lot of people talking about it. So should we be thinking about it? So, yeah.
And there is business purpose for some employees to have access to that, as TikTok is a social media platform like Instagram, Facebook, but really defining what that business use is on our network is incredibly important.
Sounds reasonable. Okay, I won't go any further, but I'll
Oh,
start.
actually, I almost backed away from the mic. I want to keep going though. I have more. So board, I had forwarded you this afternoon a couple attachments, and Clerk Moss had added them to the packet, so they are available for the public as well. One of the attachments, if your board recalls, at your January roundtable, we had talked through a communications approach for up to our fiscal year 24 budget adoption. And so we're working on finalizing the dates as we look April through June. So that's one attachment. I want to mention a couple dates just to bring to your attention. New this year, we will have 2 budget committee orientation meetings instead of just one. The first budget committee orientation will be similar to orientations we've had in the past, talking about role, process, etc. The second one will be context setting. So it will be a snapshot of the financial conversations that your board has had that have brought us to this date. That will be on the evening of April 27th. That date is an important date because that's the date that our budget is public as well. These will be open meetings, and it's also an opportunity for our public, if they want to attend a budget committee orientation, they'll be able to hear the same message. The afternoon of April 27th, we are planning a media briefing and with our media partners, and thank you, Commissioner Rogers and Chair Harrington, for your willingness to continue to be part of that media briefing. Right away the next day, myself and CFO Munn will be meeting with employees in an all-employee forum, meeting with our city special districts, as well as our CBO. So really that meeting is not to do a deep dive review of the budget. It will be an overview of the budget message, and really ensuring that we're maintaining open communication as we work through the process to budget adoption. Another important date I want to flag, but it is to be determined on the document. We are actively working on scheduling time for your board to meet with city councils, special district boards, members to also discuss the budget. We're targeting sometime the first 2 weeks of May, and we're cross-referencing that against city council calendars, et cetera. And hopefully we come up with a magical date. Listed on the document also includes the upcoming budget committee presentations with final board approval on June 20th. So just wanted to kind of get this as a snapshot of dates in front of the board. Any questions?
Yeah, the meetings that you said were April 27th, you haven't scheduled those yet because they're not on my calendar. So I just want to make sure we get them on there.
Those have not been scheduled yet. Wanted to have this conversation with your board before staff sent those appointments out.
Okay.
And any questions? Okay.
That's good.
Also attached in the email is an update on the staff work progressing through the governor's declaration order, and just if there's any questions, happy to answer those questions. Now I would draw reference to the table that is listed on page 2 of the memo, which outlines the over 10 million in requests from the county and our partners. This was a collaborative relationship to get to this point, both with cities and also our service providers. Catherine. Sure.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So on that letter, I just have 3 questions and 1 comment. On page 1, where it talks about the MACG, and it summarizes the Washington County specifics. I just wanted the reminder that when it talks about MACG, is that referring to the full metro one as convened by the governor, and then they're just giving us the Washington County specifics? Or is this really just a Washington County MACG? And I can just ask these questions today and you can follow up with an email.
If I don't know the answer, I will defer that to a later time. This is specifically the Washington County MACG.
Okay.
And then
thank
there is the metro, but this is Washington County.
Okay. When on page 1 in paragraph 1, towards the end, it talks about county goals. I'm assuming that the county goals cover the 4 cities as mentioned, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Tigard, and Forest Grove, and that the cities don't then also have specific goals that they need to meet. Is that a correct assumption?
That is a correct assumption.
Okay, thank you. My last question is, there's the table, and I'll come back to that for a comment, but then there are the paragraphs that talk about community action and so forth. So, so if I understand it right, the state will be providing that $2.6-ish million for the 673 households for the eviction diversion prevention program. That takes care of the 400 house. My question is, I assume that takes care of the 400 households at 2.4 million, about 2.5-ish that they talked about. I just wanted to make sure I understood what they were getting at there. And clearly they did talk about how they'd be providing the new submission on March 24th. So I read all the specifics in the table, and I just wanted to make sure I connected that table and their update correctly.
Yeah, I'd ask Marnie Kyle to respond to that specific question. And she's walking up to the mic.
Hey, good afternoon, Vice Chair and Chair Harrington. Yes, when the state gave us the new information that they're allocating funds directly to the community action agencies, this freed up within our allocation the 2.5 million that is allocated through that table. And I also will let you know, we just received early Monday feedback from OHCS, so we'll be able to provide an update to the MACG, the local Washington County MAC, and to the board soon.
Great. And that will be useful. The mayors are anxious for it as well. So I committed to them. I would just forward Ms. Angie's email or letter from today. So that'll be great. I'll do that. Then the last item is on the table, and it talks about, that's the table on page 2, emergency shelter, extend 125 units from June 1st to November 1st. So essentially those winter shelters become year-round shelters. And I just wanted to find out, does this include the clover leaf? Because I have a really hard time with, our staff's been pretty opportunistic in utilizing that underutilized cloverleaf building. But the cloverleaf building is quite instrumental for the Washington County Fair, specifically for the 4-H program. And yes, they would like access to it year round. So we overall, as One Washington County, we've been able to utilize the cloverleaf asset for that SHS funded winter shelter. So I just want to make sure that had board support, that previous decision. But as one of 5, I am not comfortable, if I understand this table directly, just keeping the cloverleaf in action all summer long. So I don't know where to go with that comment, but that's my comment, seeing that information.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I know that it includes the Beaverton, Tigard, and Hillsborough area, but I do not think it includes the Cloverleaf. So I will verify that and get back to you. But I'm pretty sure that that one is not included because there is a need for it in the upcoming summer months.
Okay, I appreciate your following up. Thanks, Marnie. Thank you, Ms. Angie. That's all.
And then my only other announcement is I will be on vacation starting Saturday for the week duration, and Marnie Kyle will be acting in my absence. And Chair, I am almost doing the vacation dance as well. So thank you.
Anything special you want to?
Just 2 things. As I reported last week, the cleanup at the on the property at Sellers Road continues. That we had a report. I feel weird that I've got commissioners on either side here. And I apologize for my back being
behind you too.
They're all around. It's scary. There was a report that Mr. Bearshart was bringing more propane tanks and tires onto the property. Staff is reaching out to him, including a sheriff's deputy, to try to convince him that that's not a great idea. It does violate the court order. We have the opportunity of bringing a contempt proceeding. Of course, that's more process. Ultimately, something we've tried to avoid. We could assess the cost of the cleanup against the property and foreclose on it and take it from him. We've been trying very hard to avoid that. Hopefully he will cooperate, but we're not sure. But staff is working on this. The other thing is that the criminal jurisdiction. So obviously dumping propane tanks and tires on your property is illegal, but the criminal jurisdiction for that is with the Department of Environmental Quality, not with the county. So we have no ability to do that. Brad Anderson and Rob Bovet from my office will be meeting with DEQ on Thursday to discuss possible next steps. They have been reluctant to take criminal proceedings, but as I can assure you, we're trying everything we can to address the situation that we know is a very difficult one for the community. And that's the other thing I just wanted to tell you was that, as I said last week, there was a day-long mediation on the aid and assist litigation on Thursday. I attended, as did DA Barton. It was a productive discussion. The groups have decided to meet again. The magistrate was reaching out to us. We may get some progress. The details, of course, confidential, but I can provide you an update on confidential communication. That's all I have.
If I could just comment, Roy. Tom, thank you very much for following up on this Betchart issue. It's very frustrating to me. The man for years has violated, certainly our policies and laws, and continues to do that right while we're trying to clean up, which is costing us more money. And I just think anything that we can do to reach out to DEQ and get an assist order, whatever it takes, I want us to go ahead and do that because this gentleman is obviously on his own course.
And after Brad and Rob meet with DEQ on Thursday, if they believe that it'll be helpful, I may come back to the board in April and ask the board to write a letter to ask for DEQ's assistance if they believe that might be helpful. But let's see how the meeting goes first before we ask the board to take any action.
Yeah, we've got to have, we know once that we get this cleaned up, that he's probably going to start doing this again. And I want us to make sure we know what our procedures are going to be to prevent that if possible.
Yep. Thank you.
Tough situation at best.
It is.
Disobedience. Diane, what have you got for us?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Board of Clean Water Services. I just wanted to start off with happy spring and this change in season that's upon Clean Water Services as we spring forward and we begin the transition to our summer operations and our compliance requirements. We're looking forward to hosting our board learning on Thursday, April 6th, and meeting at our field operations facility. I hear the field operation teams has some interesting things to share with the board and the equipment that they work with to share with you. A printed electronic version of the learning packet will be delivered to the board at your offices on March 28th. I wanted to also say that I appreciate the question raised by Director Rogers regarding banking and investments. At Clean Water Services, we are monitoring the potential for the overflow impacts caused by the regional banks that serve large depositors that are experiencing significant withdrawals and liquidity issues that have led to the 2 banking failures and actions to restore banking stability by the FDIC and banking acquisitions that are occurring. So Clean Water Services, we are looking at our risk management strategies for investments that are greater than the FDIC insurance. And as Director Rogers identified, collateralization provides the protection to public funds in the event of a banking failure. All public funds on deposit at a bank should be and must be protected by deposit insurance, corporate surety bond, or pledge collateral. So we'll be looking at those risk management strategies and assessing them. And I just wanted to end by, it's certainly interesting times that we live in 2023 and what happened previously in 2008. And I hope we learn from, right? But it'll be a full day. I just wanted to let you know, cycling back to the board learning. So I just wanted to prepare all of you, and we'll make sure that we give you proper breaks and hydration to stick in there with us. But I really appreciate the board. Thank you.
Real quickly, there are 3 members online, and you, Jerry. Diane said that she didn't see a lot on the agenda for her tonight, so does she need to be there with staff? I'm thinking that she could come in, obviously by Zoom. Does anybody have any objection to her doing that? You got your answer?
Okay, we'll be there virtually
Yeah.
in case there's a question.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you to all of you. Speaking about money and people who are going to talk to us about it, great, step right on up. Except this is about appointments.
This is not about money, yeah, not directly anyway.
And before we do get to that,
On the agenda?
well, we have 2 letters of support.
Yeah, I saw those. You want to take them now? We can. We got a couple minutes. There's 2 letters of support. One is for family justice center. The other one is the call was from Sherwood. And does anybody have any questions, problems that asking our chair to sign those? Anybody, any objections? Okay. You got positive on that. I'll take 2 seconds more of your time, which you got a little extra. The agenda, is there anything then we're going to hear from 153 of Jerry to close the stretch tonight?
That's right.
Anything on the agenda that it's pretty straightforward. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. So for the record, my name is Greg Munn. I serve as the county's treasurer and chief financial officer. And the purpose of today's item is to review the recommended appointments for the budget committees for Washington County and Service District for Lighting Number 1, the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District and Urban Road Maintenance District, and the North Bethany County Service District for roads. Each budget committee is composed of the governing body, that's you, the Board of County Commissioners, and an equal number of electors appointed by the governing body. Appointments are made for staggering 3-year terms, and the committees meet as often as necessary to complete the budget business, which includes receiving the budget message, receiving public input, deliberations, and approval of their respective budgets. The Washington County and Service District for Lighting Number 1 Budget Committee has 2 vacancies and received 5 applicants. The Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District and Urban Road Maintenance District Budget Committee has 3 vacancies and received 4 applicants. The North Bethany County Service District for Roads Budget Committee has 2 vacancies and received 2 applicants. Each application was reviewed and each applicant was interviewed. For the Washington County and Service District for Lighting Number 1 Budget Committee, staff recommend the appointment of Joe Everton and Karen Bolin. For the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District and Urban Road Maintenance District Budget Committee, the staff recommends the appointment of Dick Steinbrugge and Melissa Laird and Bruce Dickinson. And for the North
Can we
Bethany.
take them one at a time? For questions, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what she's asking for is, yeah, do you want to go ahead and,
Yeah, I'm almost finished. Yeah. Then we can do, you want to do questions after?
yeah, why don't you just tell us who they are? And
Okay. So, right, so for the North Bethany County Service Districts for Roads Budget Committee, staff recommend the appointment of Mahesh Udata and Bruce Young. And so this concludes the staff report. Are there any questions?
yeah, question, Catherine, it was squeaky. We couldn't really hear, but I think you had a question. Yeah,
Yeah, so can we go back to the first one?
great.
So I just want to verify that Cesar chose to not reapply. Did anyone reach out to him?
Can't see, but he's flipping through his material, right?
And along with that,
So he is still a member for this coming year and would have the opportunity to apply for another term after
oh,
this.
okay. So so what I'm really trying to make sure is that we have touched bases with the 3 current members listed in the table. That's all.
Yeah, I've reached out to all of them and have heard back from most of them so far in all of the 3 budget committees. And we'll conclude doing that here in the next week or so.
Okay. And so your recommendation is to add Joe and Kevin.
Karen,
Pardon me?
Karen Bolin, Joe
Yes,
Everton and Karen Bolin.
Yes. I only listed first names. My apologies. And do let me know if my computer cuts out on this Wi-Fi. Then on the next committee, if you happen to have the PDF handy, let me know for that table.
I think that's on page 31 of the packet.
Oh, thank you, sir. 31 of 124. Oops.
I have 31 of 65, so am I on a different packet than you?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay, all right.
I downloaded the latest packet. Sorry. I found it. It's on page 62 of 124. So, there we go. Okay. Yep. Were there just the 2 committees?
There are 3. So the last one is the North Bethany Committee.
Oh, so I'm all set on North Bethany. I was looking for the ESPD one. Since the links only work for the single topic and not for, I have to There's the matrix. Got it. The matrix is on page 39 of 124. So Dick Steinbergy, Melissa Laird, Brian Dickinson. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. Thank you very much for staying on top of those committees and syncing up with the applicants and making sure they're ready as we dive into this important work here, April 27th or so. Well, with our first orientation meetings, I always enjoy those. So thank you. That's it from me. I'm all set.
Any other questions? Pam, Lisa, Jerry?
Nope, I'm good.
Everybody's okay?
Okay, we'll see this item on an upcoming, probably consent item for the board to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a time certain for our next activity. So I guess we're going to take about a 7-8 minute break and be right back. There's nothing else we can put before it. Everything's 60 minutes.
So Dorian, do you need to come up and prepare or are we waiting?
Why don't you come on up? Easier to see and hear you.
I can absolutely be ready now. I just wanted to confirm that John L. Bell was online and available, and as he's joining me as a guest speaker. Wonderful. We can see you, John L.
Great.
Well, that's good. Let's jump in. We thought you were only that thought.
Hey, great. Jump right in. Thank you, Vice Chair Rogers and Board. Just for the record, I'm Marnie Kyle. I'm one of the Assistant County Administrators. And my role here today is to really support and kind of frame the conversation that Dorian and Jonelle have set up for you today. So with that, I'll introduce Dorian Russell, our ARPA Program Manager, and she'll be providing an overview of the ARPA Tranche 2 work plan. She will be joined today by Jonelle Bell from Disposal Strategies, and he's going to share the community input that's been gathered in our multi-jurisdictional community engagement project. What we're hoping is that today's presentation reflects what your board direction was at the February 7th board work session and from the ARPA steering committee, which is a subcommittee of the board that includes Chair Harrington and Commissioner Willie. So we're hoping that we heard you well and we're bringing back to you that input. So today is an opportunity that we can gather further input from you and learn what other information you may feel that you need to be comfortable giving the work plan a thumbs up. And then if we do receive a thumbs up, if you're ready and we receive a thumbs up today, the staff would gather really project level data from the project leads and return to your board with a more detailed version of the work plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Dorian.
Thank you so much, Marnie. That's exactly correct. For the record, my name is Dorian Russell, she, her, or they, them. I'm the Washington County ARPA Program Manager. And maybe I'm in charge of the slides. Here we go. Today's purpose, as Marnie mentioned, this is a follow-up presentation to what we had for your board on February 7th. We want to affirm the direction that we heard from you at that meeting, take any additional input or revisions that you may have to the draft Tranche 2 work plan. And finally, we're aiming to really get concrete final approval from your full board, either at the very end of April or early May. In terms of the board policy questions that we have for you today, you may give us a thumbs up, but we also want to know, is there any additional input or feedback on the draft work plan? And also, what other information can staff provide you so that we can finalize this on that April or early May timeline? Hopefully this is starting to become more familiar. This is a reminder of our ARPA timeline. We have to have all of our funds contracted, ink dry, signed on the dotted line by the end of 2024, so a smidge under 2 years from now. And we have to completely spend out all of our funds by the very end of 2026. Now, at a more micro level, what we've been doing lately, full board touch points. Again, we first presented the draft Tranche 2 work plan to you on February 7th, gathered your feedback through lively board discussion. I came back to you on March 7th, a week after your COVID-19 Remembrance Proclamation, to honor the anniversary of the passage of ARPA funds, where we shared with you some data points and also launched our public data dashboard on performance outcomes for ARPA. Today, in the middle, you'll see March 21st, we're reviewing again the ARPA Tranche 2 work plan with your additional feedback, looking for that thumbs up or thumbs down on whether we understood your feedback. We have the option to return to you again with an additional work session on April 18th, if your board so desires, depending on if there's additional discussion today or input or revisions. As Marty mentioned, I'd be happy to come back with additional detail and incorporate your feedback. And finally, late spring, looking to adopt your Tranche 2 work plan so we can make sure to meet those obligation and expenditure deadlines set by the U.S. Treasury. What we've heard, importantly, this is what we've gathered from previous board-wide discussion and as well that subcommittee of the board, including Chair Harrington and Commissioner Willie. We heard the desire to raise resilience as a guiding theme, elevated from one of our core values. We heard two main target outcomes for what we're hoping to achieve within the Tranche 2 work plan. We heard that your priorities are facilities safety and community-wide economic resilience. We heard from some members of the board that you'd like an increased opportunity for board touch points. We heard a desire to have increased understanding of what community input that we've gleaned to date. And that's why I'm happy and honored to be joined by John L. Bell today to share his expertise and what his team has heard. We heard a recommendation to reallocate Tranche 1 projects that have unspent funds. And finally, after review of financing options for those 24/7, 365 critical facilities, you'll recall a previous presentation by our CFO, Greg Munn. What we've heard from your steering committee and members of your board is that debt is not recommended, as it would further reduce general fund and our ability to carry forward county services. And for the benefit of community who is listening to this, really the two options on the table that your board could consider and were presented to you included using ARPA funds or taking debt. Taking debt means additional debt payments. Debt payments over future years means that we have less budget available for critical county services. And so that is some of the calculus that I understand that each member of the board is doing mentally. Additionally, what we've heard, so following up after that last board work session in meeting with your ARPA leaders, Catherine Harrington and Jerry Willie, we really heard the need for a work plan consisting of both new and potential rollover projects. Again, with that clean break, starting fresh with a new work plan. We heard the desire for a more comprehensive management report. And finally, given the timeline and not wanting to give any funding back to the federal government, we heard loud and clear the need to review allocations every 6 months for potential reallocation for flexibility. And this is especially important as we continue to navigate potential changes in public health mandated work. In terms of our ARPA values, as mentioned, we're elevating resilience as a guiding theme across the entire portfolio, and we are keeping in place the values of equity, collaboration, and good governance that your board established in Tranche 1. Now, resources, what we have to work with. I'm bringing this back to you in a more simplified format. Hopefully this makes more sense this time. This These include values that were reported in our last quarterly report to the US Treasury, and I will let you know that we are actively working on updating these numbers at the end of the month for a new report to the Treasury. So these values are going to go down slightly just to show what we've spent over the last quarter. As you'll see here, in terms of unobligated, no signed contract, ink isn't dry. We have $12 million that is unobligated, not in contract from Tranche 1. And the entirety of Tranche 2, that $58 million, has not yet been spent. So your total in terms of resources for what we have to work with is just over $70 million of remaining ARPA funds. In terms of your investment priorities, what we've heard from you as a board, in going to the minimum level of compliance with public health mandates, including that roll forward from what has been unspent from Tranche 1, that's $10.6 million. We also acknowledge in terms of remaining compliant, reporting, and having transparency, you'll see the effective and equitable ARPA management category. Your congregate facilities projects, again, those important HVAC investments in those 24/7, 365 facilities, that $33.4 million we reviewed at our last work session. You may recall that that value is the maximum amount that your county council determined would be eligible for use of ARPA funding. Revenue replacement, that is a technical calculation that our staff has done that shows the amount of ARPA that we can use for our general fund purposes for the county to be able to maintain stability and providing services given pandemic impacts. And finally, we heard a thumbs up in using ARPA funds for our long-term county resilience and strategic planning. Finally, in working with your ARPA steering committee, that subcommittee of the board, we have reviewed the entirety of the Tranche 1 portfolio, and your steering committee recommends rollover projects and new projects to the sum of $5.25 million, with the vast majority of these focused on economic resilience and broadband. And at this time, I'd like to remind the board, we've had a couple of different touch points over the last year in terms of our multi-jurisdictional community engagement project with the cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton. And this really has built on work with the COVID-19 Racial Equity Work Group, affectionately called the CREW, which was created during the CARES Act period for staff to be able to directly work with community-based organizations in designing the best program implementation strategies. And to dive into more detail in terms of pandemic recovery and response, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, John L. Bell from Espousal Strategies, and take it away, John L.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dorian and Madam Chair Harrington, members of the board. Once again, for the record, my name is John L. Bell, President of Espousal Strategies. It's great to see everyone this very spring afternoon, which is nice. I'm going to just quickly review some of the recommendations that CREW has made, as well as just build upon a quick refresher as to what CREW is. So next slide, please. Just as a reminder, I've had an opportunity of presenting some of CREW's initial findings at prior meetings, but just as a reminder, CREW is comprised of roughly about 275 individuals representing about 135 community-based organizations. And on average, we've seen about 52 meeting participants since October of 2022, which is when we were contracted to really work with CREW. And as was mentioned earlier, CREW was stood up by Washington County to really help steer its engagement and connectivity with community-based organizations, especially during the heart of the pandemic, and has really served as, frankly, I think, a great sort of model as to how to work meaningfully and authentically with culturally specific CBOs. This work has expanded as a result of the IGA that Washington County, City of Hillsborough, and City of Beaverton entered into to really coordinate the way in which the jurisdictions engage community-based organizations as well as community relative to remaining funding with respect to ARPA. So we've been involved and engaged in that process across those three jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder of where this work sort of builds upon is 3 years ago, this board approved your equity resolution, and it was within the context of your equity resolution as well as office that you kicked off CREW. So always helpful for us to bring it back to how it all ties back to your equity sort of frame. Next slide, please. So now I'll reflect a little bit in terms of the summary of the funding priorities. And of course, this is just specific to CREW. We acknowledge and are aware that the board is wrestling other sort of demands and requests. But the recommendations from CREW is that funding should reflect culturally specific investments and programming, that there ought to be a focus on workforce and housing with an emphasis on intersecting health and economic development needs. Communities of color in particular continue to struggle with challenges as a result of the pandemic. And so this was a lot of the commentary that we've heard come out of all of our discussions with the CBOs and the members of the community that they represent. To allow for long-term and sustainable capacity building rather than take a small grants approach. This is something that we've been in deep conversations with the community-based organizations about, is like the real need of building capacity within these organizations that so many jurisdictions are really dependent upon, but that there's a need for meaningful ongoing capacity building investment. That it be administered in an inclusive, accessible, and transparent manner with equitable outcomes as a standard. Next slide, please. Touching upon a little bit more in terms of the capacity building, there are really sort of 4 areas that have been enumerated with respect to the capacity building, one of which is just around staffing, the need for staffing to be housed within a CBO and or a CBO collaborative to really help with meeting coordination, communication, and frankly, the administering of technical skills building needs. Another category is around space, for there to be funding to promote ownership or cover rent expenses for office space and meeting space, that there be priority for culturally specific gathering space and wraparound services. Another category is around materials. There's still ongoing need for a focus on technology as well as office equipment by many of our CBOs and community. And then the final bucket is around training for the dollars to allow for learning and skill building to better connect diverse communities and to include skills around leadership, advocacy, organizational systems, data management, and communication. And so there's a real, I would say, deep hunger to strengthen a skill set and to build new skill set. I think the pandemic has really exacerbated the need for each of these buckets. But sort of the next question is how do you sort of lean in and invest in some of these areas? Next slide, please. And so finally, the recommendations from CREW is that ARPA funding allocations should be accessible to as many community partners and groups, that the county should consider enough funding for at least 100 community-based organizations, that community-based organizations should be offered funds of no less than $50,000 per contract to build resiliency and organizational capacity, and that funding should focus on addressing, again, housing and workforce needs, but account for how these may impact shared health and economic development outcomes. So that, I think, is the last slide, and happy to take any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that review, John L. And I will follow up here and mentioned, as John L did in previous board touch points, we have previously come to you with really high level priority items, mental health, housing, none of which have come as a surprise. In terms of the resounding focus that we've heard from the crew in capacity building, I do want to underscore that throughout Tranche 1, your economic development investments have really leaned into that guidance and feedback. So we have existing and ongoing capacity building efforts, especially for those CBOs that are providing culturally specific small business support. And we anticipate if the work plan moves forward with economic resilience as a roll forward opportunity, that we would continue that work grounded in this feedback from crew. Now I'll transition into the recommended Tranche 2 work plan based on that feedback we received from your full board on February 7th, as well as additional meetings with your ARPA steering committee. Earlier in this presentation, I showed you some high-level investment areas for the Tranche 2 work plan. This slide goes into a little bit more detail with the types of projects that would be included underneath each of those. You'll notice that the text in blue are areas from your pre-existing Tranche 1 plan. These are priority areas that your steering committee recommends for rollover, really versions 2.0 to be included in the Tranche 2 work plan. Again, with that clean break, these would be included in that Tranche 2 work plan, although they had been included in Tranche 1 previously. As mentioned, we have a hold on April 18th. We can come back to you with an additional work session with more project level detail with these if necessary. In terms of next step, wanting to gather board-wide input on your desired work plan investment areas. So are those bucket areas accurate and correct? We can return to you once again for an additional work plan if necessary. And as a shared goal, we're working toward adopting the work plan in late spring. And once again, these are the board policy questions that we have for you today. That's all of the information and content that I have, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Questions? Looking on our board first, I don't see any hands raised right now.
Chair Harrington.
Yep, thank you.
I'm happy to kick it off. So thank you very much, Dorian, as the point person for all of this. You've really assimilated the prior direction from the board, and I really appreciate that. And you've played it back here really well. This is great information, and I think it lays out for me quite well. I have 2, 3, 4. I have 5 questions. If I can get answers to these questions, I don't think I'm going to need further information, so I wouldn't need that April touch point, but we'll see how the whole discussion goes. So my first question for you, I think probably with Dorian. So we have had this crew effort. We've really been trying to be very thoughtful in our use of these federal dollars throughout COVID response, and now with recovery, including economic recovery. Separate from this, we've invested in the Construction Career Pathways program, and that's been an important program for our underserved community members, people of color, and also women, particularly in the trades. So I'm wondering, how is that investment related as I look to slide 19, page 93 of 124 in the packet?
Sure, I'm happy to provide a little bit more context there and then also invite Janelle and Tanya as appropriate. As a reminder, CREW began in early 2020. primarily focused on public health response at the time and has really blossomed and evolved, not only in the context of ARPA. ARPA is allowing us to pilot new and novel approaches to make our organization more resilient in the long term and with other partners. One thing that I should mention is that CREW really had the input that we've gathered from CREW, even though it has been in the parameters of ARPA, has been useful for county service delivery across departments, from ECDEV to SHS, even for areas that aren't ARPA funded, that are, permanent and ongoing. We've really been able to gather community experience and community expertise, and use this information beyond just these one-time funds. And so there certainly are opportunities for cross-pollination across the organization and across the jurisdictions that are participating, as we have so many shared challenges across our jurisdictions. And I would invite both Tanya and Janelle to elaborate further there, but we've really conceived of ARPA as kind of this resiliency pilot, and continuing the relationships and the structures that we've built, and understanding the value of that.
But more specifically, what I'm getting at is if we look at slide 19. See those congregate care facilities projects? What's the relationship? Is there any? Could you speak to that?
There absolutely could be, given that the facilities projects on here have not yet been adopted by the full board. We have not yet, gone through the process of really getting design and implementation support from the CREW. After your work plan is fully approved and adopted by the board, we would anticipate continuing to collaborate with CREW on ways to implement equity strategies in the development and implementation of each of these projects. And we would anticipate that across the entirety of the portfolio, in terms of setting equity goals and target outcomes for each and every one of these projects, and congregate care facilities would be included. I apologize. Does that answer your question?
Dorian, I'm gonna maybe take that to one sentence. Yes, this the facilities investment allows the county to further implement and bring to reality the construction pathways commitment that your board has made.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at.
From maybe to does. Yay! Okay.
Or yes.
I also want to kind of bring us back to maybe the CARES days, early CREW days. One of the feedback points that we heard through COVID was, number one, an appreciation for the county working in a very different way with our culturally specific organizations. And I think that's been an opportunity that we've been able to realize through federal funds. They also had expressed, frankly, fatigue from multiple jurisdictions trying to engage with them and asking the same exact question. So what Hillsborough, Beaverton, and the county came together, hearing that feedback in really, and I want to underscore, a pilot way using ARPA funds, because that could be the impetus to see how we could test collecting feedback in a multi-jurisdictional manner, so that we don't put more burden on our community-based organizations. So I just want to ground that additional context in what had led us into this pilot effort.
Okay, so so I'll move on to my next question, if I might. When we were on before, let's see. So I need some clarification here on slide 19. So do we have to give any further direction on how to use that 5.25 million across these 4 areas, or are we at the junction now where we have to pick and choose between those 4?
From previous steering committee discussions, we would anticipate that each of these four would be included in that 5.25 roll forward.
Equally.
Okay.
Not we could further discuss that if you wanted to move funds in between programs. Each of these programs or projects have different amounts of unobligated or not contracted funds. And I'd be happy to provide that in more detail in a memo. We do have that handy.
And that's also the purpose, Chair, that's also the purpose of coming back to the board with clear work plans for each of these, so that we all have a shared understanding of not just the dollars, but what is the scope of work for each of these efforts. Because if we think of outcomes and achieving outcomes, that's connected to what's the work plan, not just the dollars and one two-word description.
So hold that thought. Back to the timeline. I didn't connect that there were work plans. Yeah, I don't remember what slide it is either.
Yeah, I'll toggle back. I will say that this is something I can do a better job of conceptually explaining. We want each project within your Tranche 2 work plan to have clearly expressed target outcomes, the proposed actions or activities that that project will have, that are, grounded in best practice to guarantee those target outcomes. And again, with having a more comprehensive opportunity to report back to your board in an ARPA management plan, keep you abreast of whether those projects are on track to meet their goals.
So go to the next slide, please. There you go. That's the late spring.
Correct.
Formally adopting the ARPA Tranche 2 work plan and allocations. That's what you're referring to, Ms. Angie.
That's correct.
Okay, I get it. Yep. For some reason, in having looked at these slides in advance of our meeting, I was thinking, oh, okay, well, that lovely slide 19 is what we would be adopting. But that's just the overall summary framework, and there would be that detail coming. Great, I get that. Others may have comments later. Also, Dorian, as Mr. Bell was finishing up his presentation with those recommendations, and then just before you transitioned to the Tranche 2, you made a comment on crew about the work that we were doing in supporting capacity or with the capacity building with culturally responsive organizations with our economic development work. So I'm not sure I caught the 100% of that meaning. And my next question, my next couple of questions will relate to that. So just bear with me. Crew started with the CARES Act work, and the board made sure that for all of that initial emergency response that started in March of 2020, that our efforts were in fact informed by the equity resolution and subsequently followed up on. And then as we were putting together the Tranche 1 framework, we recognized how we were trying to do things very quickly and more effectively than we had with the CARES Act funding, CRF. We moved very quickly because we had to get all those dollars spent by the end of the year until the feds did the last minute switcheroo extension, which was good. But then when we learned of the tranche, the ARPA funding in April of the year 2021, we set out with an initial framework and also asked for that better engagement with community groups. And that's hence where the idea of collaborating with the two largest cities, Beaverton and Hillsborough, was arising, in addition to our need for more data. So there was the passage of time, and then by November 10th of 2022, the board had, prior to November of 2022, had approved the IGAs. And to be quite honest, I've looked back at them. Ms. Angie reminded me last night when we adopted those, might have been in March of 2022, March 15th, from my notes, cryptic notes from last night. But as of November 10th, 2022, through the community engagement, community connections emails that the board was provided and that were made public to lots of folks, that's where there was this invitation for community groups and CBOs to share their perspectives on what an equitable COVID recovery investment strategy would look like in Washington County. So I'm thankful for the crew effort to provide us with input, and I appreciate their sharing their opinions about our broad-based work as well as specific programs. I'm still left wanting to understand what their input is on an equitable COVID recovery investment strategy and what that would look like for them here in Washington County. So I am, Ms. Angie, assuming that through the closure of that program towards this pilot effort, that it doesn't go on forever and ever, that we will be getting a report to close the loop and document that. Am I correct in that assumption? Because otherwise I'm left with assumptions.
That's a good question. We will bring a report back to the board. I think the other thing that's important is, just as with many of our efforts in ARPA, to use this as learning opportunities and to look at what worked, what didn't work, how can we do better moving forward as we're a learning organization as well. So with each of these, there's opportunities to do that.
Well, we on the board have only been given 2 pieces of information, really. One was those IGAs that we approved back. I think you helped me understand it was last night. We did that March 15th of 2022. So I looked those over and agreed with everything in the topic sheet and didn't see anything from the IGA with Hillsborough that's listed first, and then the IGA from Beaverton that's listed second, that I'm uncomfortable with in any way, shape, or manner. But I still don't see here today how that question is being answered. That's information point number 2. Those many months of emails with this open invitation. So I'll just leave that at that for now. Then my last question is, both looking at slide 90 or the slide on PDF page 90, which is capacity building needs, is the title. And then page Oh, it's just that page. Sorry. Trying to interpret my own notes.
Page
So
780,
titled capacity building needs.
one more.
There you go. To me, this seems to be asking, oh, slide 91 talks about community partners and groups in terms of the recommendations. So between the slide on capacity building needs and that first recommendation, it feels like we are being asked to invest in the development of existing nonprofits or invest in the formation of new CBO nonprofits versus invest in economic recovery.
Madam Chair, I'm
May-
happy. No,
Please go ahead, John.
yes, I'm happy. I think it's both and, Madam Chair. I think what we've heard from our community-based organizations is, yes, they want to see Washington County, City of Hillsborough and City of Beaverton and other jurisdictions that they're in conversations with to continue to invest in efforts to build their own capacity and resilience. Because I think what we have found based upon the community engagement and interacting with them within the context of CREW is that COVID really exacerbated sort of the needs within these community-based organizations. And the end part is, in addition, as well as making pointed investments in efforts to sustain and support small businesses within these communities as well. So I think it's both and.
I'll also add here. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Pretty quiet.
Okay.
Oh, I couldn't tell where that was coming from.
I would just also add to your question about, did CREW respond to the question of what is an equitable recovery or equitable economic recovery? The response to that question is CBO capacity building. And as it relates to economic resilience, we've seen a key learning from across the pandemic, in response, recovery, and resilience, that we are not always the best positioned compared to culturally responsive organizations to provide direct service. And we have really been part of a full community ecosystem in providing services.
Thank you.
And if I can just add one other point that really came through all of the conversations and that I think folks really wanted to echo was at the heart of COVID, as all jurisdictions were scrambling. These CBOs really partner closely with the county during the response. And again, as a result of reaching hard to reach populations, that was so critical. And again, I think that just exacerbated the need for capacity and sort of ongoing efforts from that perspective.
I think you want to hear from us at some point. We've been 40 minutes and we've heard from one commissioner.
The only thing I was going to add, thank you, Jonelle, but I was just going to add that as Dorian spoke to earlier, that we're learning across the organization from the information that CREW is sharing, that they're hearing from the CBOs. And as an example, we're looking across the organization at not just ARPA, but what other resources are we using across the organization to help with the CBO capacity building? So looking at SHS, looking at our, as we receive behavioral health funds and workforce development funds. So that's all I would add. And yes, we do want to hear from you.
Well, I wasn't being impolite to anybody. I just knew that we had it scheduled for an hour. It's 45 minutes plus now. And Pam, do you want to go next?
I'll just close with, I'm very familiar with how the Washington County SHS program and the Metro Affordable Housing Bond program have excelled in our engagement with communities of color and historically underserved communities. both individuals and group. Less so with this report out today. Thank you.
Pam, do you want to go next with comments or questions?
I'm sorry here. I guess one of the things I just want to reemphasize, and I know we've been talking about this, is that what we've learned is not just for this time frame either. This is for into the future and down the road as well. So that I just want to make sure that I get that out there.
Do you have any questions you want to ask or have answered? Or okay. Nafisa, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I'll be quick, Vice Chair Roy Rogers, and say my comment from last week hasn't changed. Last time this information came on board or came in front of our board, I expressed some concerns and asked that we come back with a different way to cut this pie. And it sounds well. I appreciate Dorian, Marnie, and the staff who are working on, and Janelle, thank you for presenting this information. But I am deeply concerned. I really think that we need to go, we need to take a step back and go back to the drawing board and say, what else, how else, where does the community fit in this slide? And then, you know, I was trying to figure out what is the best way to characterize like what my hesitation is with how we're allocating this tranche 2 funding. And I was trying to figure out like what is it exactly that what we're doing here. And today we had I saw a constituent that wrote to us about what we're doing with our tranche 2, and they used the word misuse, and I couldn't agree. We are definitely misusing how we are allocating the ARPA dollars, and I'm trying to figure out. I know I asked the question earlier, and I think I asked in my briefings as well, around like, is this in violation of the intent of the ARPA dollars? Seems like 34 million out of 58 seems a pretty high number to allocate. And remember, I'm with you on this journey. I completely agree. We need to take care of our facilities. We need to address, there is a liability question here. We need to hands down really take care of our facilities, but I'm not sure the use of ARPA is appropriate here, and especially 34 million. Could we cut that in half, or could we figure out what else we could do? And it's not acceptable to the community that we're misusing our ARPA dollars here. And I will address that and commend our county council, the work they did around figuring out it's not a violation. Yes, we're allowed to do it's within the guidance, the treasury guidance. But just because we found ways to be creative to use the ARPA dollars doesn't really give us the right to use it as a bailout for the county's own mismanagement. And I don't think it gives us the right to neglect the community's needs and the intent of this funding. And I just want to appeal to our board and say, you know, as a board, we owe it to our community to uphold our commitment to equity and show that in our investments of ARPA investments. And I hope that we find a pathway or a path forward to better balance this between the community needs and our facilities needs, because that's what's at hand here. We're pitting the county facility needs against the community needs. And I really, what was said earlier, the both and, it's a both and. And I think we have a moral responsibility to figure out what that balance is of both and here. So I hope we can keep the conversation going, and I hope that we found a balance of the needs of our facilities versus the needs of our community. Find a sweet spot where we can balance this budget, where maybe the county doesn't win, doesn't get all the 34 million, and the community doesn't get all the half the community wins, but we come to a compromise that everyone gets somewhat of this money, and nobody is neglected, including our facilities and the people that utilize our facilities, that are in custody of our facilities. And with that, I turn it back to you, Chair. Oh, Vice Chair.
Thank you very much for your comments. Gary, do you want to?
Yeah, I need to go back to, I'm going to respond to your comments in a minute, Nafisa, but so listening to what John Al had to say and the ask of $50,000 for 100 CBOs, I guess I didn't even know that we had 135 CBOs. I'd like to see that list if those, because that's a large number. So we're talking about $5 million ask. Is that $5 million in this allocation of 70.4 million?
No, it's not. This is a reflection of what we've heard from previous board conversations. If you would like to include that, we would be happy to make a revision.
Where would it come out of?
That would be up to your board to determine.
Who's going to choose the 100 out of 135 CBOs? Or who gets to pick the 35 that don't get funding?
I think that we would want to come back to you with a project management plan and established metrics of evaluation and criteria for you to approve. Or at least the steering committee to approve.
What are we going to do about the other organizations that have already made their ask? The Home Share for 250,000, the Latinx Policy Council for 600,000. There's going to be a lot more when we start opening this door.
The intention. Oh, Tanya,
One of us.
Mr. Bell was presenting the feedback that we had heard through the engagement process. That's pure feedback. It is not put into a project proposal. It's just what we heard directly from community through the engagement process.
Well, I know. I was just asking for procedurally, how would that work? Because once again, I mean, I've been asked by other organizations if there's going to be a possibility of this. And at this point in time, I've said no. Because we've got allocations and we've got a rough draft structure. And no, there isn't. And so as soon as this word gets out, then we'll have plenty. So let me go back to the I guess just a second, I got to get there. The cruise input on the congregate care facilities. Would you explain that to me again, Dorian? Because I didn't follow that and I didn't want to jump in when the chair was asking her questions. So could you run by that one more time?
Sure thing, I'm happy to. If your board approves this work plan, we would formalize each of those congregate facilities projects, as an ARPA project. And as we have done in the design and implementation of previous ARPA projects, we would look for community input on how we design and implement. So that could look like certain goals in contracting with COVID certified firms, for example. It could look at the types of processes that the county undergoes in contracting, making it more accessible and equitable in who we are paying for services. There are a variety of different types of goals that we could tie to each of those projects where it could be appropriate to work with culturally specific groups to understand what barriers to career pathways to construction to, it would depend on what the target outcomes are. Again, with having a work plan for each specific project, we would want to identify what the goals are and have crew help design the project. to the degree that it would make sense.
That sounds like a lot of bureaucracy to me. I thought if we look at our procurement guidelines and policies that we have put into place over the last 3 years, wouldn't that pretty much cover and give us the direction we need to proceed on these? I mean, the law enforcement center services, I mean, it just seems like these are kind of in a crisis position, and we certainly don't want any catastrophic events to occur. We certainly don't want to have to close our jail because of something happens, and then we put into place a number of these hoops that we have to jump through before we get to construction. And I'm just concerned that we're putting into place a lot of hurdles before we get to actually doing something.
Sure, it would be input, not additional administrative hoops to jump through, and we would of course keep that in mind.
It sounds like it's going to take longer.
I have already directed facility staff to start on those projects. At the point that we get to contracting, and if we need to determine on a temporary or emergency basis funding for any of those projects, I would be coming to your board immediately. So facilities is actively working on these projects right now. So I want to underscore that.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to circumvent the responsibility of crew, but at the same time, I don't want the tail wagging the dog. So that's probably my concern.
We have an opportunity to engage with our community in soliciting subcontractors, contractors into our contracting process. Kitty Kong out of the Office of OEICE has stood up multiple engagement events to build that capacity with the community. This is a great opportunity to expand that communication network directly with our partners who are involved in crew and continue to expand that so we further build and diversify our construction pathways here in Washington County.
Okay, well, I'm not opposed to that. Just again, I don't want these slowed down when we get lost in bureaucracy. And the last thing, I guess, is this is directed kind of to you, Nafisa, on your observation on this. I'm going to trust that our staff and certainly our legal and finance staff have done their homework on interpreting how we can use ARPA money. And I'm certainly not going to become an expert in that, just to make sure that they've done their homework. We hold them responsible and accountable to do that. So with that, they are saying we can use $33.4 million for these projects. For us not to do that, half as you say, or less or more, whatever, encumbers future commissions, 20 years worth of future commissions, and removes some of our general fund ability to provide services. So we'd be basically giving away money and borrowing money. And that's really not a very good financial strategy. So I think it's our responsibility as a commission to make sure that we try and meet all of those needs, but we prioritize them as well. And I think allocating this money in this fashion does that. And so I guess we can agree to disagree. Thank you. Go ahead, Roy.
Thank you. First of all, I'd start by thanking the chair and Commissioner Willie for their work. This isn't easy. I mean, it's anybody thinks that this is going to be a continual type of funding is sadly mistaken. The United States government cannot afford to continue to do this. We just can't, as a nation, have any hope for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be able to live in a society in which they're not overly indebted. So I understand the significance of the financing. I understand the significance of what's going on. I want to thank those two for taking upon themselves and putting in the work, because it's not easy. I would be with the position of spending it on the capital as much as possible. I don't think there's anything. In fact, I know there's nothing illegal about that. I've seen these funds across the state and people are doing this exact thing. I think of the hardworking people who get up every day, whether you're working at McDonald's or Intel or in between, you get up every day and you're paying your taxes. You don't want to be faced with an issue of saying, I've got to now pass more bonds to put on roofs and HVAC systems. Because we shouldn't be convinced otherwise. If we don't fix these things with the money that's available, we're going to have to tax ourselves. So for those who want to tax themselves, that's a position you need to stake out. But if you're saying these need to be fixed, and they do, and I think there's even a few more probably not there, that's the position I would take. My comments in regard to the 100 ask, I haven't looked at them. I don't know exactly what those are. It sounds like a lot of peanut butter to me, just from being uneducated to what's going on there. I'm all for sustainability. I've never thought you throw a bunch of money at things and hope that you're going to get something out of it. I think you pick the programs that are going to work. You very deliberate in that, and invest in things that are sustainable. I don't want to put words in Janelle's mouth, but I mean that's what he was saying all along: sustainable. And so we need to take a look at what will play out in the future and what is good. So I think the questions that we're being asked about, is it 50,000 for 100? I mean, I wouldn't personally care if it was $5 million and it was $1 million for 5. If we had something that I knew was going to be here 10 years from now versus 50,000 that would basically go to administration of small contracts. And at the end, statistics tell us that, people go out of business. Nonprofits go out of business. And so I think we need to give our taxpayers something of value. So your plan and work in general is good. I think what you're hearing is diversity of opinion in regard to how funds are spent. I err on the side of the working people of this county and this state who are paying those federal dollars and paying those state dollars and saying, give me something that I don't have to come back and keep paying on. So I've said everything I need to say, but as I understand it, and I will ask Tanya, are you going to come back with something for us all to chew on, or we kind of affirmed? I mean, you heard a variety of opinion, but how do we proceed?
So I think the question before your board is, do you want to have another conversation on this? Or do you need additional information for us to bring this back as a proposal and finalizing the work plan in April? And I see the chair's hand, both hands.
She'll be conducting the next one, so please.
Can we go to the slide after this one? Yes. So this, I think, is getting to Commissioner Rogers' question and what Ms. Angie is saying. So what we heard earlier was there's our meeting today. There's the possibility of an April 18th, and then there's that late spring. So, so 4 of us have weighed in on slide 19. We're still a little curious about the how the 5 point whatever will be invested, but we heard from Ms. Dorian. I didn't get your last name, Ms. Russell. Thank you. We heard from you, Dorian, that you'll return with more of that information. And now I see on this slide, I thought it would come with step 3. So let me give you the opportunity to see, did you really want to bring that back in April 18th, or just wait until you have the full meal deal for step 3?
So I think what we're offering is if we get a thumbs up on the general framework on the previous slide, that we would not have to come back on April 18th unless you directed us to, but we would go straight to a late spring, Mayish meeting where we would share the final, more detailed work plan and ask for your approval.
Action at a board meeting.
And that would be, yes, an action item at a board meeting. So it's just, the question is, do you want that interim step before the action item comes before you at a spring board meeting?
Well, so one thing that was articulated earlier is that one aspect might be taking that 5 million and spreading it over these 4 categories equally. I don't know that our encampment program was invested previously at the same level. So that's the only unease that I had, is really, that might be a bit too much for me, but I don't know that I'm going to sweat that one so much.
May I
because-
offer some clarification, Chair?
Thank
Each
you.
of these right now assume that the unspent portion of those Tranche 1 projects would roll over for the corresponding program. And so each of these have a different amount of unspent funds that we would anticipate rolling forward within those programs unless advised otherwise.
So it would go on top of the 5.25 if there's a rollover.
No,
That
that's what
is,
makes
that-
up.
That's
what
where you
makes
lose
up.
us every time, Dorian. So
Mhm.
what I suggest, Ms. Angie, is that just a memo be put together, and if necessary, Commissioner Willie and I, as the steering committee, can review that and share that, with the assumption that you get a majority thumbs up on slide 19. So
We can put that memo together to further clarify not only the investment amount, but a brief description of what each of those areas are.
Mhm,
yeah,
And if we could have that sooner than later,
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
so
Okay.
we have some time to noodle over that. So that's good. I agree with you, Chair. Thank you.
yeah, I think that would be really good. And I would say, just as one of my comments, that I know on this slide 19, with all of this work, that every single one of these line items addresses community need. Whether crew has commented on it or not, I know that with every fiber of my being. So I feel very comfortable that we are advancing the state of our community members, including those who've been historically underserved in our community. So I'll just leave it at that. And Commissioner Rogers, Vice Chair Rogers, when you call for thumbs, I'll
Be ready.
answer.
Commissioner Treese.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Commissioner Willie for talking about the effects of the debt we would incur if we went forward with the if we didn't pay for the congregate care facilities projects. And I think that that's a really important issue. And I'm very concerned about encumbering our future commissions, future leadership of the county with those costs. And I also want to remind once again people that these costs came up 7 months ago. So we've been in a very difficult situation, and I will be voting thumbs up on this as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Fye, is there any last comments?
Yeah, I will not be supporting this.
Thank you. Mr. Willie?
I'm good.
The only final comment I would make is just for, I guess, full disclosure, I asked Greg Monda, what would it take to bond 35 to 40 million, double that? So you're talking about some levy that would go out for 70 to 80 million dollars with interest. That's a lot of future debt service. So I'm a thumbs up as well. So how many years? I think I heard 4 thumbs up, and Commissioner Fye is not in agreement. So it's 4-1, it sounds like, to proceed with this particular model. And you're going to give us some more information to our subcommittee of the
Yeah.
chair and Commissioner Willie.
So I just want to be clear, we will put together a memo, work with your board subcommittee to ensure that it meets clarity, and then issue that memo to the entire board, which will provide clarity in the 5.25, the blue area of the screen. Then we will prepare to come back to your board at a board meeting with more detailed information on this work plan for formal board action this spring.
Perfect. I think we're all in agreement. Yep. All right. Well, thank you too for spending a little bit of your time this afternoon with us. I need to at least walk away for 5 minutes.
I need to go get some water. So let's
Yeah.
take a 5-minute break.
5-minute break. Okay.
Set the clock there, Kevin. Well, I've been doing that too. You-
Commissioner Fye, Commissioner Treese, Chair Harrington, are you back with us?
I'll be back in a minute, Kevin. Go ahead and start without me.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. Yep. Back to you, Vice
Okay.
Chair Rogers.
Could I actually, Commissioner Arch, could I say something?
Absolutely. You
Sorry, I'm sorry. I apologize for taking a second of your time. Commissioner Willie and Chair Harrington were referred to as a subcommittee. To make clear, they are not a subcommittee. They are two commissioners who meet to discuss this informally and come back to the board. A subcommittee would have requirements to meet the public record meetings law, which they are not. So they're not a subcommittee. So just for the record.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. Please jump right on in.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the board.
We've always just been a steering committee of just two to try and help make sure the information gets shaped. So it wasn't a subcommittee.
Yeah, it's not really a delegated authority from the board. It's two commissioners working informally to advise the board.
Yeah.
Yes.
So noted. Please. Identify yourselves and jump right on in.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Erin Wardell. I am the Planning and Development Services Manager, and with me is Steve Kelly, Senior Transportation Planner. We are here today to provide a briefing and request board direction on implementation of the Climate-Friendly and Equitable Communities rules. That is a mouthful every time we say it, so generally staff refer to it as CFEC or CFEC rules. These rules relate to parking reform requirements, and that's what we'll be providing an overview of today. There are also additional regulatory requirements that we'll need to implement at a later date, and we'll provide you with an overview of what those rules are. We'll then have time for some questions and discussion. Our purpose and desired outcomes today are to provide an update to your board on these rules and their effective implementation dates, to receive board direction on potentially asking for an alternative timeline for implementing these rules from the state, and then to review and gather your feedback on these regulations and our future approach for implementing them into our comprehensive plan documents. The policy questions that we'll return to at the end of this presentation are, would the board like to provide guidance to staff to request an alternative implementation timeline? And does the board have questions or feedback about staff's recommended approach to future implementation of the required parking reforms? And with that, I'm going to turn the slides over to Steve Kelly, who will walk us through the technical information.
Thank you, Erin. Yes, I'm Steve Kelly, a Senior Transportation Planner with the Department. Thank you for your attention on a very complicated, complex subject today. Sorry to be bringing forward such a controversial and potentially complex issue. These are long-range planning rules and goals adopted by the state. And I will say that what you get out of the planning process is often related to what goes into the planning process. These are long-term planning rules that are intended to affect the long-term future of Oregon's metropolitan communities. They were initially in response to Governor Brown's executive order in 2020, and they were adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission in July of 2022. So just a few months ago, last summer.
Chair Harrington.
I'm sorry to have to ask for a clarifying question right at the beginning. Are we approaching this topic because of our responsibility for the urban unincorporated areas, or are these executive orders requiring county action from every county of the 36 counties?
We're responding to these because of the metro areas requirements for planning for metro areas. Yes.
So the rules apply to the metropolitan areas in Oregon and jurisdictions within the metropolitan areas. So for Washington County, it applies to the urban unincorporated area.
Thank you, UUAs. Appreciate it.
Now, I'm sorry, that's a great question, Chair, but I didn't understand the answer. I thought your answer was going to say everything in Washington County. We're making the decision for everything in Washington County.
Yeah, so these rules will apply to the urban unincorporated area, the pre-existing rules prior to the adoption in July. Those rules are still in effect for outside the urban growth boundary, outside the metro boundary areas of Washington County. So they have a couple different definitions of urban area in there, and the metro area has specific rules that are separate from the other metropolitan areas of the state. But this is in response to the urban unincorporated area, the UUA, and related to compliance with state rules for our urban areas.
And the cities have to adopt their own,
That's right.
Correct, right?
but they have to follow the same rules.
Yes.
Similar at least, yes, the same set of rules. And these rules have significant implications for throughout Portland metro area, as well as the other metropolitan areas for land use and building, as well as transportation. On the land use and building side, these rules designate what are called walkable climate friendly areas. In the Portland area, those are our Region 2040 regional centers and town centers. The rules, their words are reform parking management, and then provide for pedestrian friendly and connected communities throughout the urban area. On the transportation side, plan for high quality transit, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. There are rules about how we go about prioritizing transportation projects to meet climate and equity outcomes. And there are rules to reduce our future vehicle miles traveled per capita. So I do want to note these rules take effect incrementally. And the first one that I'm going to be talking about the most is related to parking reform. And there's 2 phases of parking reform, but also coming are some future rules will kick in. The parking rules are 11 of the 64 sections. However, some of the other rules that have been adopted may have just as significant of impacts to our community. And those other rules include the designation of climate friendly areas or regional town centers and regional centers. There's a lot of language in there about transportation performance standards and vehicle miles traveled. And we're still working with the department to figure out exactly what will be required there and how that's intended to work. And they could be very impactful sorts of rules about measuring, or perhaps not. And we just haven't really made a full determination how impactful this will be, frankly, because the rules are not clear enough at this point. And then there's a number of rules related to transportation system plan updates. There is a provision there to ask for additional time to respond to these rules, and DLCD staff, Department of Land Conservation and Development staff, have indicated that the rules are in the process of being amended. So not only is this relatively new, but it also is a bit of a moving target. So the first thing that goes into effect, they call parking reform. Parking reform has 2 parts. Part A actually went into effect January 1 of this year. And I'm going to come back to that and talk about it. But parking B results in amendments to our community development code to implement the new requirements. For either situation, if a developer builds or expands a parking lot, the ADA parking spaces continue to apply. So there's a certain proportion of any new or expanded lot that is required to have ADA spaces, and that would continue. So parking A has 2 parts, and the first 2 bullets summarize the first part there. The first bullet notes that jurisdictions may not require more than 1 parking space in residential developments, 1 parking space per unit. And that's very similar to what we have in our community development code now. So that's not hard for us to implement. It's consistent. The second bullet there lists 7 different types of land use categories that jurisdictions in metropolitan areas may not condition to require parking for. And this would be a minimum parking. They can provide parking on their own. But for those 7 types of developments, the development code would not allow us to require a minimum amount of parking. The third bullet on this slide is indicates the areas within transit corridors. And they have defined those.
Sorry. On that second bullet, really? No affordable housing, no public supported housing? So none of our affordable housing applications effective January 1?
They may provide parking of their own volition, but the community development code would not be able to be implemented that would require a minimum amount of parking for a development.
Okay, okay, thank you. I really needed that clarification.
Right.
I'm following now.
That's
Thank
a
you.
good- That's a good clarification. If you did something like the Fields property in Tiger, you have 170 or 80 units and no parking. It's gonna be a mess.
Well, that could be the situation. It would be up to the developer, the applicant, whether they chose to provide parking or not, and how much, up to the other standards that are in our code. But there's not a minimum anymore. The third bullet is much more impactful than the first 2. Jurisdictions may not require parking spaces in what they've defined as transit corridors. And that means 3/4 miles of a rail transit station, including all West and Max stations, as well as 1/2 mile of bus corridors with 4 or more buses arriving per hour. So that is, again, dependent upon the transit providers in our community. Again, these went into effect. The Community Development Code has not yet been updated, and staff is applying these state rules directly to affected applications. So this next slide is a map of
Hang on.
Questions?
Sorry, I think, I know, I don't want to wait until the end because I think some of these are simple answers. So I assume you have a list of what the CDC says for some of these applications, and you and the team, the full LUT team that has to process applications, has a good list for yourselves and those developers that you don't have to do those sections anymore or whatever it is, right?
We do.
Thank you.
Commissioner Treese?
Thank you. Could you go back to that slide just one more time, please? I'm sorry, I'm a little, I think that was
Maybe.
that one. Thank you very much. So does that mean that we can't require the parking spaces, but so a developer can come in with a plan, and if they don't have parking spaces, we don't have any option there. And then, and so where we're going to get blowback is from the community when people park around the area. So I'm just want to make sure I understand.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yes.
What's happening here. Okay. And especially in relationship to transit. I mean, so what that does is effectively there's no park and ride type concepts here at all.
Well, it would be up to a development within one of the transit corridors, how much parking they wanted to provide up to our existing maximum parking and our other requirements, but our minimums are no longer
We don't have any
in
minimum.
place. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Got it.
And so
Okay.
this next slide is it shows the staff map of where these rules are in effect now. The transit buffers here affect slightly less than half of the urban unincorporated area. This is in effect now. We are applying the state rules to development applications. This map is also used throughout the parking rules for some other items. And it's based on existing transit service, not planned transit service. So as transit agencies adjust their schedules in response, this map may adjust further. And we do know that transit agencies are looking towards adopting new transit service programs and plans. So we're monitoring those carefully, and there may be adjustments as we go forward. And again, that's roughly half the urban unincorporated area. So that's parking reform A that's already into effect. I see a hand being raised, I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. On the map, have you all with the cities been able to confer on this map?
We have conferred. That doesn't mean we're necessarily 100% consistent in the way we've measured the transit service. Everybody had to come up with something in a hurry. And so we came up with something, and this is what we came up with.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So that was A in effect. Parking reform B is more impactful than A. And it has several parts.
Hold on to your seats, ladies and gentlemen, said the chair.
The first one there, I'm going to come back to a little bit more because it's pretty complicated. Several sections of code are summarized on a future slide. But in general, we are required to remove parking minimums throughout the urban unincorporated area or comply with some alternative pathways. The second one is talks about parking area regulation, and there we will have the new parking maximum requirements and new parking lot attributes requirements. So how the parking lot is laid out is included here. And I will point out that land conservation and development staff have indicated to us that they are expecting to recommend changes to these rules in April. And there may be new temporary rules that would be adopted. And then additional discussions with community staff. They realize there are some issues with understanding and interpreting these rules, and they anticipate going back for additional amendments in November. And they've indicated to us these changes may be important for how Washington County structures compliance. And clearly we have something of a moving target here, but their staff have recommended that Washington County request what they call an alternative implementation timeline or schedule.
There's no consideration for relaxing some of these guidelines.
I don't know what is actually going to be considered or how the rules are going to be adjusted. We've made some comments. I'm sure a lot of other agencies have made intelligent comments about them as well.
But there's not a path for not doing these things. If that's what you were asking, the path is just, we'll give you more time to implement them into your code.
Chair Harrington.
These are the same, are these the rules that some cities are suing the state over?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. My understanding, I think it may have gone up, but I've heard there were 13 cities, or maybe a couple more, and at least one county is I don't know if suing is the right word, but pursuing a legal recourse for these rules.
Have we considered that?
I'll let Erin answer that one.
Not yet. As a board member, I don't think we've ever contemplated it per se.
We provided 2 briefings to the board while the rules were under development, and then we
Yeah.
had internal staff conversations about that. Our indication at the time was that the rules were uncertain, and so we didn't know if we should join the lawsuit, and your board is busy, and so it's difficult to have that time to have that detailed conversation. So I think our approach ended up being, let's see what happens with this and let
Yeah.
other jurisdictions carry the water on it.
So my thought of seeing what happens with it, I have a 1-word response. Wow. Thank you.
I guess I'd like to have us consider whether we want to do that and the pros and cons of doing that, because these are ridiculously restrictive. And since it came from the governor's office and went straight to LCDC, and we were not asked what we thought or what it was going to look like or anything else. I don't like mandates, and this is absolutely a significant mandate.
And I'll add the word unfunded to that, because this is very much an unfunded mandate that we have to implement on a very fast timeline.
Yeah.
Commissioner Treese?
I think another factor here is our UUAs are not necessarily associated with other corridors for transportation. You look at Bethany or others, and it makes it even more difficult. So I can, I'm not saying that it's easy to do this in a municipality, but I think it's even more difficult when you're talking about some of our more island type of situations.
I would just echo her point. That's a really good point. Plus, we're a transit desert in many parts of the county. And so you start putting in the infill, which we've all agreed we need to do, and you put in heavy infill, meaning large complexes with no parking. This poor board will be inundated with people who are unhappy about everyone parking in front of their house, blocking their driveways, parking, go down to the transit center. I mean, this is going to be a mess at best.
And just to add one more point on whether or not we joined the legal action, there was a relatively short period of time when we could have decided to become a party to that. And so it wasn't enough time for staff to even digest the rules as they had been adopted and figure out what it meant for us to implement them. And so that's part of the reason as well that we didn't join as one of those parties.
So does that mean we can't comment?
We'd have to confer with county council on that and see what our avenues are to become a party or file a brief. So that's something we could look at.
We could always provide comment at LCDC meetings.
Yes, that is a path forward. And so we could prepare comment for the April hearing, certainly.
Yeah. I just wanted to share that I need to go off camera because being on Eastern time, my stomach is growling like nobody's business. So I need to go snack. Thanks.
At 7:30, I understand.
We're gonna be there.
I'm going to try to explain this slide. I'm just going to try to explain this slide. It covers multiple sections of code and tries to do so succinctly. There are, in general, 3 pathways for complying with the remainder of parking reform Part B. Pathway 1 is simply to repeal all minimum parking requirements throughout the urban unincorporated area of Washington County. The cities are also considering what to do with this. Pathway 2 and Pathway 3 have a number of attributes that are the same and some attributes that are different. The first 2 rows there say the same thing. You don't have to look to see if there's a word that's different. They say they're trying to indicate the same thing. The first row has opportunities, indicates there would be opportunities to reduce the amount of parking required. And there's 8 categories in which a developer could choose to do something other than provide additional parking spaces by getting reductions through those types of categories on either Pathway 2 or Pathway 3. In addition, both Pathway 2 and 3 would require Washington County to develop some form of what's called unbundled parking. And that's where the rent, lease, or sale of property is separated from the parking space. Reviewing the department's guidance on how to implement this, they indicate this would generally require the organization to adopt some form of general ordinance related to regulating the rental, lease, or sale agreements of existing residential properties. And that would be within the transit corridors shown above in the case of Pathway 3, or throughout the entire urban area in the case of Pathway 2. In addition, the second row there is requires the county to adopt on-street parking pricing for 10% of all on-street parking spaces. This is one of the situations where we may end up with a change in the rules. Coordinating with their staff indicates that this may not be something that continues to apply to Washington County. But it is also a significant number of parking spaces that would need to be priced. We're actually not sure how to count how many parking spaces there are on streets in unincorporated urban Washington County, but 10% would be a large number. We do not have a parking meters or parking pricing program of any sort now, and we think it would be difficult to implement one. So Pathway 2 is called the fair pricing approach, fair parking approach, and requires 3 of the 5 policies listed there. Pathway 3 tries to get to the reduced regulation name of it, and it has a number of limits on the amount of parking that can be required, minimum parking that can be required for development. That was a lot. Also parking reform B has parking maximums. Our existing standards for maximums are not too different than what is required here. The new one for us is buildings more than 65,000 square feet floor area. That includes residential buildings. And we don't know exactly, how impactful that's going to be, but it is the surface area parking would not be able to be larger than the floor area of the building. And we may have some other adjustments to certain uses for our parking maximums, but we're generally close or similar in most circumstances. Parking B also has for when a development does build or expand a parking lot, requirements related to how that lot is designed and structured. There are requirements to allow for redevelopment of parking lots, including redevelopment for transit-oriented bicycle parking, et cetera, but conversions to other uses. And there's a question, I don't blame you.
I think you're still muted.
Sorry, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt your, sorry, I was on slide 12. That one. For residential development, the second sub-bullet, 2 off-street parking spaces, didn't we just address parking as part of the middle housing ordinance? And
that's something we've been taking a look at, is how this interacts with the middle housing rules, but they appear to have come from different separate processes. So before we amend the code, we'll have to review that in more detail.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I do want to draw your attention on this slide to the third bullet down. For parking lots that are more than a quarter acre in size, there's a number of requirements for a new or expanded lot of that size. And in particular, there's tree canopy or enhanced tree canopy requirements there. And Washington County currently does not have a tree code, but we do have a street tree approved list, but we don't have any way of organizing how big the canopy of a tree is. While this does require us to provide consideration of that, and we don't have anything related to the layout of trees or features in the parking area.
Chair Harrington.
Thank you, Steve. I just need the quick reminder. Would this be for new development, or would this be retroactive so that existing parking lots would have to be retrofitted to meet this standard?
This would be for new or expanded parking areas.
Okay, thank you.
Expansion could be anything, I presume. If you expanded a rec center or you on the complex, if you expanded the swimming pool, if you expanded.
Something that came
Numbers
in
in
for land use review, right,
anything
would
that
have
came
this
in for land
requirement.
use review. So it could be anything. Laundry room gets bigger.
Yeah, any type of use that is building a parking area would have the new requirements for associated with it. Yeah.
Great.
That's an incentive plan.
Yeah.
Furthermore,
Mr. Willie says
there's-
we're gonna balance the budget by putting in paid parking. now.
Yeah,
He said, we got a lot of money.
we could put in parking meters, especially in District 2.
They're wealthy, you said. They can afford it.
And furthermore, there's electric vehicle charging capacity requirements. So these go into effect in about 10 days here. New multifamily buildings with 5 or more units must have electrical capacity for service to 40% of parking spaces. Washington County is addressing this through the electrical permitting process until our development code can be amended and updated to match these requirements.
So is this a bad thing?
I don't know the full extent of how expensive or impactful it is to install additional electrical service capacity in new construction or remodels for that matter. I don't know, but it would be only for multifamily residential buildings, 5 or more units. I don't know if that's how the impacts there. I'm not the expert on electrical service panels.
I'd like to think the private sector will step into that gap quickly and say, we'll do that for you. Because I have to believe those are profit centers.
It's tied to an ORS as well. It's not just rules.
So keep on. Oh, I was gonna tell them keep on going. Yeah.
Just a quick question, and I don't want the answer now. Given our affordable housing pipeline, construction pipeline, Ms. Angie, could we get a summary of which proposals are still in the land use review pipeline that might be affected by this? Because 40% is pretty steep, in my opinion, just for 2023. I think it's a good goal, but to require 40% for 2023 as of April just surprises me a little bit.
It doesn't include the actual charging system. It just includes the electrical service capacity. That's my understanding. So we've been coordinating with other jurisdictions. Corvallis and the city of Tigard have partially removed their minimum parking requirements and are in the process of updating their development codes. The other departments that I've coordinated with are all pursuing pathway 1. It's simply very challenging to go after the other pathways. A number of jurisdictions in the metro area have also requested alternative implementation timelines.
And that's the one that you were recommending, at least for parking B, right?
Yeah, pathway 1, remove all minimum parking requirements It seems like the other pathways are very challenging. I think they would be for Washington County as well. But we could explore them further if we had more time. So here we are. And then this is the first part of the regulatory changes. Again, these are 11 of the 64 new sections of code. So there's several other things forthcoming. Next is in the metro area. Metro is required to amend their urban growth management functional plan. And their amendments are scheduled for 2024 in the ordinance, and our responses to that are scheduled for 2025 in their rules. The changes to the urban growth management functional plan are likely, at least the way they're worded now, to result in us needing to do additional planning around the Raleigh Hills Town Center. And again, this could change, but that's what we envision may come out of the next part of the process. And there are additional requirements for land use and transportation in all of the regional and town centers. Furthermore, when we go about updating our transportation system plan as a major update, there are a number of changes we will need to make as part of a parallel track to our community development code related to land use types of actions. And we're still exploring those, and we think that'll end up being a separate part of our next transportation system plan update. Speaking of transportation system plan updates, there's not a timeline for completing one. However, there is a variety of things that we can do as far as modifying or amending our plan that are called a minor update. And we could go ahead and process minor updates before doing an update, a major update. But we will be required to do a major transportation system plan update just to sort of resort the plan based on the language and requirements of these rules. In general, the plan is very much in line with a lot of these requirements. Maybe some of the other agencies and cities were not. However, we think ours is fairly close. There, of course, are some things that we will have to take a hard look at as we do go through the update of the transportation plan. Particularly any project that does not demonstrate a reduction in vehicle miles traveled may have additional thought need to be put into it. And yep, checking my notes. I think that's it except for questions. So I'll turn it back over to Aaron to talk about the next steps.
Yeah, just to wrap this up, we wanted to revisit our staff recommendation. And so our staff recommendation is to request an alternative implementation timeline for the elements of parking reform B. This is particularly because we expect DLCD and LCDC to make changes to these rules throughout this year. And so it doesn't really make sense for us to quickly file an ordinance when the rules may change underneath us. So at the time we prepared this PowerPoint, we had been told by DLCD staff that requesting a 1-year extension is very reasonable. So that's what we put on the slide. We then learned that many other jurisdictions, including Clackamas County, received an 18-month timeline. And so we think it may make more sense to ask for 18 months. And if they walk us back to 12, that's okay. But I think it might make sense to be in line with Clackamas County's requirement. And then we're also looking for the board's guidance on receiving a recommendation or preparing a recommendation for the future ordinances as a part of the long range planning work program, which you'll receive a work session on next month. Chair Harrington?
Let's go to Jerry first. No, that's okay. Go ahead, Chair. What she's up there. Go ahead.
I don't mean to step on the vice chair's role because he's doing a great job.
Thank you.
While I'm on Zoom. But you have a staff recommendation from slide 11 to proceed with parking B pathway 1. And I just want to make sure that we as the board take the opportunity to give you direction on that. That's all.
What slide number was that, Chair, that you were referring to?
11.
Slide 11. And actually, I think we have that here as well in our policy questions. Actually, maybe we should go back to 11. So pursuing pathway 1, I can go back to 11 so we can look at that one. That is the table slide, yes. So receiving your guidance on this will guide how staff prepare our future ordinance. So we have some time on this. We'll bring it back as a part of the work program next month, and then we'll have the opportunity, hopefully over the next 18 months, to bring an ordinance forward to you, or maybe multiple ordinances in order to address these requirements. But generally, we would appreciate getting at least a head nod that we're on the right track with pathway 1. We think that pathways 2 and 3 are probably just too onerous for Washington County to take on.
So I've been using all my Zoom body language to
to vote for 1.
teleport what my preference is. I hope Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Rogers are getting a kick out of me, as I'm sure I'm bigger on the big screen than I am on my little teeny screen.
So should we pause here and see, is there any guidance to pursue the other pathways, or should we focus on pathway 1?
I just want to know, Catherine, is this a 1 to you or something? What's wrong with it?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I think we're in agreement with pathway 1.
Devil horns.
Yeah, I see that.
I
You need one of those big foam hands.
Yeah.
For number 1.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, my only 2 comments would be, 1, I'd ask for 24 months instead of 18, because then they'll back you down to 18, never start at 18 and get back down to 12.
I like that.
And then I would consult, just me, I would probably consult with county council and see if we can't file an amicus brief to be heard. I think he's done a good job in tutoring me and others about, you're either on the plate or you're part of the process.
At the table or on the menu.
There you go. That's even better. Yeah, I said, and so I'd like to have a place at the table. That's just my personal belief that we ought to be able to talk about these things. They're for good purpose, but they're not practical. Yeah. So that's my thought. Pam or Nafisa, did you guys have comments that you want to make? Didn't want to.
I just had a
Please.
minor question for Aaron or Stephen. Do you know what path most cities in Washington County are thinking of? Are you in conversation with the cities to try to figure out? Because it would be really weird if we had one requirement and then the UPAAs had another one.
My understanding is that every jurisdiction is pursuing pathway 1 at this time. I think the city of Medford was maybe entertaining pathway 3, but we didn't hear that they had decided on that for sure. And the default would be pathway 1. So it seems like pathway 1 is the consensus choice.
And then you can direct me. That's one that's just my own curiosity and knowledge. And you can direct me which document I need to dig deep into. But I was wondering, is there any projections of the significant reduction of carbon footprints with this, either pathways 1, 2, or?
We can certainly look into that and see if that's something that DLCD staff prepared as a part of the rules. I'm not sure that I've seen that though, so I don't know if it's out there.
I haven't seen that.
Okay. We can look into that though.
Thank you.
Well, I think Commissioner Fibe touched on something that I was thinking of too, is they would keep referring to VMT and a reduction of VMT because we're basically taking away the ability to have a car or incentivize not having a car. This doesn't seem to really make a heck of a lot of sense. So what are the lawsuits directing at? What are they asking for?
There's a couple of different factors in the legal action that was filed. One of those was based on the fact that it's an unfunded mandate for jurisdictions to comply with this. I think there was also a case made for overreach of DLCD's authority. And then I believe there was a challenge to the way that the rules were created and whether or not it followed the correct rulemaking procedures. And so I think those were the main 3 points. And we would have to check in with the other jurisdictions and find out the status of that legal action at this time to see where it is.
Would anybody be opposed to having you bring back some more information, maybe Tom giving us some little dissertation. Just seems like we'd understand, okay, I'm seeing Tom. Jerry?
Yeah, yeah.
At least we'd know what's going on.
We can do that.
Yeah,
We'll prepare that for
I
you.
would agree.
Pam, did you have anything more? I didn't want to cut you off.
I was thinking more on a big picture thing is we get a semiconductor factory that comes in and builds a D1Z. And
With attached housing.
Intel's great at building their parking structures out there. Would those mean, would that even be allowed? How do they facilitate another 1,000 employees into one facility, or how many ever it is? I mean, this sounds to me like it's very anti-economic development, period.
Well, it doesn't prohibit the developer from doing it. It just means that we can't require the developer. That's the way I read it. Am I right? Steve?
Correct.
Well,
Correct.
with the exception of going back to what they require of you to do in a parking lot.
And that's what I was going to add is that is correct, that a developer can voluntarily provide the parking, but there are very strict requirements for parking lots that are voluntarily provided. And there's some additional requirements for structured parking. And so Intel oftentimes provides structured parking as a part of their campuses, just because we're using them as an example. And I don't know enough about those requirements for structured parking and how onerous they may be on a developer. We just don't know yet.
Well, just the solar panel requirements would be significant, so.
Yes.
So, okay, I think we're all good here.
So this next slide talks about our next steps. So we have time on the Planning Commission's agenda for their April 5th and June 5th meetings. We briefed them for the first time in February on these rules. We are able to provide community briefings as requested. Steve will actually be going to the CCI tonight at the same time as our board meeting this evening in order to provide them with essentially the same presentation. We would like to prepare that alternative timeline request, and it sounds like the board is generally supportive of us doing that. So we'll submit that to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. We'll then be developing our draft work program description of this work and laying out what we think are our options for developing an ordinance, understanding that the rules are still in flux because of the April and November LCDC hearings. And then we'll be continuing to track the other regulatory requirements and other implementation timelines. Chair Harrington.
Thank you. Two things. One's a curiosity. I really appreciate seeing this aerial view in the picture on this slide. I at first thought that might be the Fano Creek Trail, but I'm not sure. It might also be, I don't know where. I'd love to know where that is. That's all. That was the first thing. My second thing is Ms. Angie, as we've been going through this, particularly the things on this slide, I understand these steps for parking, and it's a little easier for me to get my head around the fact that there are community development code changes. For whatever reason, I can't tell you precisely why, but the TSP update ramifications for doing work worries me a bit. And so I would appreciate, before we're at the close of August, just before we plunge into the quote unquote fall from September through the end of the year, I would appreciate having a summary of what is on our LUT's plate with regard to all of the land use and transportation planning work that needs to happen for this. Oh, what was the acronym you tried to? CFEC. Because we also know that our staff is challenged by a still appreciable list of transportation planning projects that are going on. See, you guys, I do absorb some of what you present. Chris is probably dancing in her chair, Chris Deffenbach. But then there's also updates that we need to do through the normal course of work. And it just, part of that checks and balances is I'm asking Ms. Angie for you to come back to us, or at least to me, and convince me that that these deadlines of 20, all these deadlines from different projects can be met, because it seems sizable. And I also want to add to that, that I concur with Vice Chair Rogers on asking for 24 months for the alternative timeline. Here, here. So, wow, this has been an incredible update. Thank you very much. I have a much better appreciation for what is on the plate. Thank you.
So Chair, to your request, we'll bring that information back to the full board out of just information's sake, and also workload and understanding what work is happening when. And as you were talking, I could see my colleagues nodding their heads that was a very doable ask.
Yes. So I think our last slide is just revisiting those policy questions, and I think that we have discussed those. So we have our orders. We know what to do next.
Okay, that's a wrap then. Thank you.
Just wait, Vice Chair Rogers, I believe there were a couple other comments on the two letters that we earlier had talked about. Chair, did you find your notes and you wanted
Yes,
to
I
make a couple
did.
comments?
I apologize to my colleagues for not being more organized here. On the two letters that we gave thumbs up to earlier, I wanted to just share the comment on each. On the Sherwood rural broadband one, I really appreciated that letter, and they talked about having shovel-ready areas that they've already examined. So it's really nice to be able to offer that letter of support. On the FJC letter, given that it goes to the state Capital and the Ways and Means Committee, I was hoping that there could be a minor modification to our letter in paragraph 4, and also add to paragraph 5 to make it clear that this is an independent nonprofit. I think it was paragraph 4, second sentence, and then paragraph 5. Because this agency doesn't run the FJC. That's all. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And then Ms. Angie, I just wanted to raise that in the GR report out for us, bringing to our attention the Secretary of State advisory opinion on pay equity. I invite you to let us know what further changes we should consider in order to eliminate wage gaps. And you may already have that work underway as part of the comprehensive work you're doing with HR. But I just wanted to bring that need to life. That's all.
So Oregon pay equity. I think I will ask David Martinez to work with HR staff on a briefing memo to your board. I think it's important to lift this up, and also the challenges that we are seeing in hiring due to pay equity and the implementation of pay equity. So there's with all good intended legislation, there's some challenges. So we'll kind of walk through those challenges and what that means to our current classification system. I do want to underscore the need for us in the future. We are not at that point yet, but to undergo a full class and comp study to modernize our current system.
Thank you. And so really, Vice Chair Rogers, I was just wondering if the board would entertain adding that clarification that I mentioned on the FJC letter. Because they're gonna have so many. Sorry, you're little on my screen. I see your arm going up, but is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Which do you want? Give us a thumbs up. Two of us were thumbs
Have
up.
a thumbs up.
There's 3, 4. You got them all.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, so I guess we're adjourned till tonight. See you then.
See you at 6:30.
No morning.
Yeah.